Now, for those of you who don't know much about the CIS, and for those of you who haven't been here for a while, we are a classical liberal public policy research organisation. We were created in 1976, and I think history is very important when we introduce our guest speaker this evening. We were created in 1976 by my colleague and our successor, Greg Lindsay. And 1976 is a very interesting year for the Year of Liberty because it was the bicentenary of two of the most important documents for liberty. Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations and the Declaration of Independence written by America's founders, primarily a great man of the Enlightenment, Thomas Jefferson. And 1976 was also the year that Friedrich Hayek, the great Austrian economist, came to Australia for the first and only time. And 1976 was also the year that one of our intellectual heroes, Milton Friedman, won the Nobel Prize for Economics. So we were created in 1976 and we've been very much part of the great debates surrounding economics, culture, education, among other aspects of public policy. And on the economic front, that's what brings us here this evening. We are thrilled and honoured that John Cochrane, one of America's most distinguished free market economists and leading experts on monetary policy, could be with us this evening. He's in Australia and New Zealand this week as a guest of the central banks, the Reserve Bank of Australia and New Zealand. He was at the Coombs building in Kirribilli for the last 2 days for a conference, and tomorrow morning he heads to Wellington to do a similar conference at the Reserve Bank of New Zealand. John, I'm a huge fan of John, and I know many of you who are here this evening are also big fans of John. He was for many years at the University of Chicago, whose economic school is one of the real trendsetters when it comes to monetarism and free market economics. In more recent times, in the past decade or so, he's been at the Hoover Institution, which again is a sister think tank of CIS. And he's author of a very prominent book, The Fiscal Theory of the Price Level, and that's published by Princeton University Press. And he's also a regular contributor to the Wall Street Journal editorial page, which in our judgment is probably the best opinion page in the world. It's one of us, so to speak. And with that, please welcome John Cochrane.
Thank you. Thanks. It truly is a pleasure to be here. You may ask, why do I visit central banks rather than just coming to talk to you? And the answer is because central banks pay business class. You know, who prints the money. So I want to tell you a little bit about a project that I'm on. I call it Free to Grow. I hope it's the next book. You'll notice the allusion to free to choose. But free to choose was nearly 50 years ago, and it's time to update it for today's world and today's problems. And it really amounts to, I've been blogging and writing op-eds and so forth for about 15 years now. It's time to put all that together in one place, which I discovered is not as simple as copy-paste, because you copy-paste and you got immense amounts. It means copy-paste and boil down, and that's much, much harder than I thought. So part of that process is to come to talk to people like you, where I have to boil it down, because after half an hour, you're going to fall asleep, and we can't go on and on too far. So thank you for coming. What is the most important economic issue of facing us or the globe or anyone else? Is it climate change, inequality, unemployment, recession? The answer is none of the above. It's long-term growth, the one that nobody talks about. Now, to get you to think about growth, why it's a problem, and why we need to do something about it, let me ask another quiz question. When was the best economy ever? Now, a lot of my left-wing friends, they'll point to, the 1950s were just wonderful because, the economy was growing and middle-class jobs and so forth. 1950, the average American income was $15,000 in real terms. Today, it is $60,000. 15 versus 60. Which do you want? It's not even close. The absolute best economy ever in all of human history is right now, by a long shot, unless you want 15 versus 60. Now, this is GDP per capita, and it evokes yawns, but I want to get you excited about it. GDP per capita is not just about more stuff. It's about, first of all, better stuff. that household in the 1950s had a tiny house, badly insulated, terrible cars that rusted immediately, one maybe black and white TV. Healthcare, they all smoked. But, most things, if you got cancer in 1950, well, it's cheap, and then they'll send in the priest. GDP per capita is health, environment, education, culture, defense, social programs, any hope of repaying government debt. GDP per capita, people look down on it, but it correlates with everything else. I'm trying to appeal to the progressives in the audience, which might be a few, but we nonetheless, we have to listen. You want to eliminate extreme poverty, health, child mortality, clean water. All of those things are just collapsing. The number of people who live in extreme poverty around the globe has fallen dramatically. Child mortality, our ancestors, even 100, 150 years ago, many of their children died. And as a father and grandfather, I cannot imagine that heartbreak. That's just practically unknown. That comes from GDP. That comes from economic growth. That comes from, it's all part of it. Even, things like parks and a clean environment, that all, you have to be able to avoid that stuff. One of the things I find most shocking is the new degrowth movement. A lot of the climate movement will admit that it's really not about the climate, it's about an excuse to stop growth and go back to some idea of the farm. These people have never been on an actual farm, say in India, and had to go get the water by hand first thing every morning. It's just, and it also annoys me because how much does the world economy have to grow before everyone can enjoy the standard of living of, say, a social justice activist who likes to fly private jets to Davos? We got a long way of growth before that can happen. GDP is actually a vast undercount. People say, it doesn't include, parks and so forth, but it's a vast undercount of how much better off we are now than in the past. Among other things, it's at market prices. It doesn't count willingness to pay. If you remember your economics, the willingness to pay is always much greater than the market price. We get Google Maps for free. That's worth a lot. GDP counts it as nothing. And medicines may be expensive, but if you're about to die, you'd be willing to pay a whole lot more than the $10,000 it costs. A lot of our progressive friends worry about, we can't keep growing forever. That's wrong. GDP is not just more stuff. First of all, we keep forecasting the end of resources, and it keeps not happening. But where we're going, GDP is the value of things. It's producing valuable things for your fellow citizens. It's funny, they say it's immoral to go make a profit. You should go do social justice. The most moral thing you can do is to get up in the morning, work hard for your fellow citizens, and they pay you for it, which shows you how valuable it is to them. But what we are doing, where we're going is a services economy. The economy of the future, the GDP of the future will be, for example, health. It'll be the ability to live longer and to conquer diseases and to live happier. That doesn't take a lot of materials. Now, I emphasized across time, 15,000 from like 1,000 in the 1800s, 15,000 in 1950, 60,000 today. This is just an enormous increase in prosperity. Let's look across countries. What's the economic problem for India? Should they worry about recession? Should they worry about inequality? Well, their income is 2,000. Our income is 60,000. The number one question for India is how to be more like us. That's just orders of magnitude more important. Even China is only 20,000. This swamps these kinds of numbers, 15 to 60, 2,000 to 60,000. That swamps every other economic issue. A recession is maybe a fall of 2 to 5%. We're talking orders of magnitude. Climate is, as you know, in the news. Let's just take the IPCC reports that say this will cost us 5% of GDP in 100 years. 5% of GDP versus, doubling, tripling, quadrupling the process of growth. India, $2,000 plus or minus 5%, or $2,000 to $60,000. And this swamps that kind of issue. Now, the question is, will this continue? As long as we're thinking climate change and the economy of 100 years from now, instead of 5% better off, will growth continue at, say, 2% a year? well, then it's 200% better in 100 years, or 3 times better than today. If it was 4%, we would be 5 times better than today. Those are big numbers. 2 times better than today, 4 times better than today, or just like today, the end of growth. So the question I see for Western society is, will that continue? And the danger is the creeping stagnation that it may not continue. The U.S. From 1950 to 2000 grew per capita 3.5% a year. Since 2000, it's been 2%. We're cutting the growth rate nearly in half. And the U.S., as much as I will bemoan it, is doing better than everywhere else except maybe Australia. You guys are catching up. But Italy, my favorite country to go visit, stopped growing in 2010. Just a disaster. Europe is falling behind. The U.K., mother country to us both, the U.K. is half as well off as the U.S. in GDP per capita. And it's stagnating and going nowhere. Half. Again, I'm gonna pick on climate, not because climate isn't important, but just to get a sense of proportionality of what's important relative to other things. The crisis of climate change, 5% of GDP in 100 years, relative to doubling the UK's GDP per capita if they could just be like the US. So climate change is, the UK versus US is 10 times worse than the damage of climate change. We should be paying attention to long-term growth and that convergence. So for us, the issue is stagnating growth. And if it keeps going, whether our children and grandchildren will experience what we did relative to our grandparents. Of course, for India, for China, for Africa, the ability to live lives like we do in 100 years rather than be stuck in grinding poverty forever, that is the most important issue. So where does growth come from? Productivity. In the end, it's all about what can each person produce per hour. It's about supply. It's about efficiency. It's not about stimulus, demand, central banks, sending money out. It's not about unions. So why are we all wealthy? Because say your grandfather, likely worked in a mine, and it's 1890, and kaboom with a pick. Did we get richer because unions made the profits of the mine go to the worker, and now he gets 50 cents an hour rather than 25 cents an hour at the pick? No. It's because now the mine is run with some enormous machine, and everybody else moved to the city and got nice jobs like we have. It's about productivity. In turn, it's actually something is really stuck in our policy discussion. It's always 1933. It's jobs. It's stimulus. No, Keynes is dead. We're stuck with the long run, and the long run is about growth and supply. Where does productivity come from? In the end, ideas. Ideas, not just products and inventions, the iPhone, we all understand that's an idea, but the little ideas of how to run businesses better. My favorite, since I spent a lot of time, Southwest Airlines, if you ever travel in the US, they figured out how to board an airplane in 10 minutes. United still takes us 30 minutes because we're all going there fighting for the overhead bins. Then you swim upstream to check your bags. That is productivity growth. 10 minutes to board a plane versus 30 minutes to board a plane. Every little thing, old-fashioned businesses like steel. Steel, I just found out in the U.S., is cut by at least in half how many man-hours it takes to make a ton of steel. The yields on boring things like wheat are just boom, 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 up every year. There's the slow improvements in how do we do things. So it's ideas. And ideas are very tricky economically. The crucial, and I'm going to say something that you probably won't like. The crucial thing about an idea is that it's what we call non-rival. It's intellectual property, iPhone property, real property. If you take my iPhone, I can't use it anymore. If you take my wonderful recipe for spaghetti alla puttanesca, I can still use it. It doesn't hurt me at all for you to use it. Now, why are we all upset about intellectual property? Intellectual property, once created, should be used by everybody immediately, and then we're all more productively. Why are we so upset about intellectual property? Well, you do need the incentive to create it, but you only need the incentive to create it. It's tricky that way. Universities, my business is creating intellectual property and giving it away for free. That is a good thing. Now, that leads you to say, well, we should subsidize research. We should subsidize new ideas. No, don't jump to that. In fact, many of my growth theory economists jump to, subsidize research. That's the answer to producing new ideas. The problem is, and let me tell you for sure, because I work in a university, it is very easy to subsidize terrible ideas. In the past, there used to be theology departments, whatever. I don't know what you think religiously, but that doesn't improve productivity. Now it's called departments of intersectional studies, which is the same thing, but it does not lead to productivity gains is what matters with us, whether you want. It is easy to fill academic journals with BS. So we need ideas, and for us, we need new ideas and better ideas. It's much easier for China, India, and Africa because the ideas are there. They just need to copy. The only reason India is not as productive as the U.S. is they don't do things the way the U.S. does. Their technology, their productivity is not as high, which is a whole bunch of things, education, legal system, management, all the rest of it. But they don't have to invent anything new. They just have to copy ideas, and it's not going to hurt us for them to copy them. Ideas need to be embodied. So it's not just ideas. Lots of inventions sit on it. They need to be embodied, usually in new products, new businesses, new ways of doing things, so they need incentives. And that is, I don't really call it free market economics, I call it incentive economics. That is the one thing we have to offer. Nobody else pays attention to incentives. Our job is to pay. You need the incentives to take those ideas and implement them in new products, new businesses, and every step is hard. We think of growth as 2% per year is just going to happen. No, every one of those 2% is hard work to do things a little better and to upset the established order. The problem is every step is disruptive. So think about Uber and taxis. Easy example. Uber comes in obviously better, right? We get cheaper rides, cars get used, people get employment opportunities, part-time work, and who hates it? The taxi companies. Now, I don't know what happened here, but what happened in the U.S. is just an unholy mess. The taxi companies had been protected forever. They don't like it. Everybody, don't count on businesses to be for free markets. Businesses hate free markets. Businesses want protection from competition and an easy life. And that's the problem. This process of productivity enhancement has to be embodied in new businesses that disrupt the existing order. So all of regulation is designed to stop growth. Think of economic regulation. What does economic regulation do? By and large, it says, I protect you from competition from him in order to keep the existing way of things going. A lot of it is about transfers. I'm going to take money from you and give to him, but we're going to do it very inefficiently by making you charge, by forcing you to charge higher prices. Regulation is designed to stop growth, not to get it going, to preserve jobs, businesses, all ways of doing things. Why? Because we live in democracies. Democracies are responsive to the needs of their citizens. And when the citizens come screaming to stop competition and preserve my way of life, democracies give them what they want, good and hard, as H.L. Mencken used to say. My ancestor, I have an ancestor who came from Germany to the U.S., and he came to the U.S. They hated Germans at the time. He went to New York. He didn't speak English. He wrote back, come to America. The streets are paved with gold. Why? They were in a business. They made furniture, and they wanted to move into pianos, but the guilds in Germany didn't. He says, there's no damn guilds here stopping us from doing what we want to do. That's what it needs. So how do we get around that? Well, we have property rights. We have rule of law, the institutions that protect our ability to innovate and to cause problems for the existing people. So why are we stagnating? In my view, the answer is simple. We got people, we got ideas, we got entrepreneurial spirit, we have abundant investment capital, we just can't get the permits. Now, my notes say U.S. regulatory nightmare, insert horror stories. And we have all heard horror stories of regulation, gumming up the works of doing things. The good ideas include public institutions. Now, I'm a good libertarian with lots of adjectives in front. and one is a rule of law in a libertarian. Property rights, a rule of law, an efficient legal system, the protections against depredation, against the ability of your neighbors to go and demand competition. That's really important. And we see that good institutions are one of the most important things to getting to growth. That's why. So how can we get going? Growth again? We got to fix all the sand in the gears that's getting in the way. Can this help? There is a strain of thought in economics that says we have just run out of ideas. That's the end of that. Growth is bound to end. I don't think that's true, but let's fix what we can. We can look and see lots of sand in the gears, and we can certainly improve the level and I think we can do an enormous amount. When you look across countries, the GDP per capita from the Central African Republic, which is about 200, to India, 2,000, China, about 20,000, UK, about 40,000, US, 60,000, there's a very strong correlation between our incomes and ease of doing business index, rule of law index, those kind of institutional indices. So we know what's good. What's amazing is how big the effect is. From 200 to 60,000, it's really just institutions. My favorite is my colleague Chad Jones has a textbook on growth theory, and the cover is a picture of Korea from a satellite. North Korea dark, South Korea light. Now, the good Lord has given us a controlled experiment. I'm sorry for the people of North Korea, but you want same background, same culture, same language, same everything. In fact, North Korea was the wealthier part before the war. You want a controlled experiment on what government can do? It's just amazing that it can do so much damage, but there it is for you. Well, continue that regression line. The ease of doing business index puts the U.S. at 82. 100 is possible. 100 just means the best observable everywhere. As I run that regression line out, that puts the U.S. 400% higher than it is today. Well, that seems possible. That is, I think, a strong effort. So how do we do? Fixed regulation sounds, like pie in the sky, and the bulk of what I have to offer is, concrete ideas of how we do it. The problem is, there's a political problem. Stimulus is so attractive. Stimulus is, I, the great politician, will give you money, and this will float all our boats. Yay, write me a check. Fixing things is a reform effort, and every market is screwed up in its own way with a bunch of vested interests. I call it what we need is the Marie Kondo approach to our public life. You can't just stimulus. You can't just go down and buy a lot of containers. You got to fix the sock drawer and then the underwear drawer. And my God, the garage is waiting for us, the tax code. Well, that's the way it is. You have to know where you're going and start that reform effort. So I want to give you some examples. You're not going to get in the next 10 minutes a program for everything, but it is the Marie Kondo approach. How can we get out, though, of the debate? You can see there's sort of stuck. And what I've been thinking about mostly is, I don't want to call it out of the box because that's so trite, but a way beyond sort of the standard left-right dilemma. And I think that's right. I think there is an answer to most of our problems that is not just one or the other side, more of this. What do you have to do? First, many regulations actually have some reason to them. So understand why, but then do a better job of what they're doing. One important exercise is, what's the question? As you look at policies, most are answers in search of a question. My favorite being like tax the rich. It's always tax the rich, but why keeps changing over the time. Well, let's get the question, and then we can find a better answer. Regulation is not more versus less. Regulation is better versus worse. Well-crafted versus not well-crafted. Full of unintended consequences and bad incentives or not. The game is to fix, not just more or less. That's harder. Another important principle, think of the overall incentives, the overall system, not just parts in isolation. And above all, think about the incentives. No one else is thinking about the incentives. Politics is just about taking from you, giving to him. Nobody's thinking about the incentives. If you think about the incentives, you're away from the political wrangling about who gets what. So, for example, let me start with an easy one, taxes. What should we do about taxes? Well, what's the question? If the question is raise revenue for the government with minimal damage to the economy, I said the question. Once you say the question, the answer is very simple. The answer to that question is eliminate income taxes, corporate taxes, estate taxes, taxes on rate of return. Basically just a flat sales tax on absolutely everything. That raises the most revenue for the government with least cost now, the objection, what's wrong with that? First objection is, wait a minute, that's going to be like a 50% tax rate. Yeah. If the government's spending 50% of GDP, the average tax rate is going to be 50%. And if you don't like that, you need to spend less. It's the same tax rate now. It's just raised in a different way. What we do now is we put it in lots of different places so people don't know. But the idea is simple. What about inequality? Well, number one, get the rich at the Porsche dealer. If you have a flat sales tax, you're going to get them. You're just going to get them at the Porsche dealer, not when they make the money. And it's vastly simple. But what about inequality? Oh, you mean that wasn't the question? The problem with our tax code is it's trying to do, and this is the U.S. By the way, I should say, I don't know anything about Australia, and I hate Americans who wander around the world telling other people what they should do. So, but I'm going to seem parochial as a result, because all of my story is about America. We're trying to do 15 things. We're trying to raise revenue. We're trying to transfer income. We're trying to subsidize all sorts of stuff. Like my neighbor in Palo Alto lives in a $5 million house, got $7,500 from the government for his new Tesla. That's nice. We're trying to subsidize all sorts of things off budget without actually, we're taxing and spending without taxing and spending. Well, you're trying to do too many things. No wonder you got a mess. Let's separate these. So the way I'd like to do it is let's put all of that stuff on budget as expenditures. A flat taxes said, oh, it's not progressive. But the taxes don't matter. What matters is the whole system. If we raise money efficiently with a flat tax and then spend checks to whoever you want to spend, the whole system can be as progressive as you want and as progressive as the voters will like, or as less progressive as you want. But it doesn't matter. There's this focus on each one individually. No, look at the whole system, and that can be as progressive as you want. And that, if you put it on budget, then it's up to the voters. I'm going to follow principle. I got nothing to say about transfers. All I got to say about is incentives, and I want the lowest possible marginal rates with the highest possible revenue for the government. That fixes the incentives. How high those rates are, up to you how much you want to spend. How much gets transferred, up to the voters how much they're happy to do. Let me talk about social programs. We are, in the U.S. at least, we're running 5 to 7% of GDP structural deficits, and here come the retirement of the baby boomers. That's our debt problem. Well, here's a classic of left versus right. Right, we got to cut social programs. We're going to go bankrupt. Left, you heartless whatever. You're going to throw grandma from the back of the train. How can you do that? Rah, 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 rah. How can we break out of this one? Let's look at incentives. What's the real problem with American social programs? The real problem is not how much money we spend. The real problem is the disastrous incentives. And it's incentives of the programs all put together. You take the average American between $0 and $60,000, if they earn an extra dollar in legal income, they lose $1 of benefits. And that's on average. There's many cliffs where you earn $1 and you lose all of your health insurance. Make sure not to earn that extra dollar. If you have affordable housing with an income limit, earn an extra dollar, you lose your house. People are very smart. They respond to incentives. The other problem we have is that low-income Americans basically don't work. The labor force participation is just catastrophically low. Well, duh, why don't they work? Because if they earn an extra, you want to cheer after me? If you earn an extra dollar, you lose $1 of benefits. So why don't we work on fixing the disincentives of social programs? What will happen then? What will happen is more people work, so they won't need so much social programs. You'll save money. You'll help people who actually need help much more effectively. And you reduce sort of the cycle of poverty and dysfunction in a lot of our neighborhoods. How can we do that? Well, one of the most important ways is that the problem comes from all programs together. It's the food stamps, it's only like a 50% implicit tax rate. But if you add the food stamps, the Social Security, the earned income tax credit, the low income bus pass that actually exists. I mean, all the things that are income limited, you put those together. So why don't we put those all together instead of having 150 actually different programs? Remove the cliffs. One of the most crazy things in the U.S., if you get another dollar of income, we lower your benefits. If you go get out and get another program that gives you another dollar of transfers, we don't lower your benefits. Well, we can fix these things. Control the disincentives. Banking. Oh boy. Banking regulations. This is a classic one of disincentives. And we've just done this again. We're in this cycle of the crisis comes, bail everybody out, promise to fix it, it doesn't work, run comes again, bail everybody out again. This is an important one because there's remember the little old lady who swallowed the fly? She swallowed the spider to catch the fly, and so on and so forth. This is, when you think about how things got bad, it's not just dumb people. It's smart people patching up a dumb system. And that's what happened. A run happens, what do? You got to bail out the creditors to stop the runs. Now you have moral hazard. A bailout, deposit insurance is like giving your Uncle Luigi your credit card on his way to Las Vegas. That's what we economists call moral hazard. So we write rules, okay? No double down on 16, no spinning double black, or whatever. Luigi figures out, I have an Italian family, so I get to use this. Luigi figures out and goes to the craps table, and next thing you know, you got another crisis. We have the answer. So it's a sensible thing, but now it's falling apart. We have the answer, which is it was put in place in the 1930s, but it requires tearing the whole system down and starting from scratch. And that's the hard part. The answer, by the way, is banks should get their money by issuing stock, and then deposits should just flow into trade. It's called narrow banking. It's been around since the 1930s. There's a lot of people making money on the current system. Housing. You have a housing problem. We have a housing problem. Let them build. And I'm only beginning. Health. Oh, boy. Healthcare. This one always causes me problems, but I got to tell you, so healthcare in the U.S. is one of the most dysfunctional things around. It's actually possibly worse than socialized healthcare. Fully private healthcare can work. Now, here in 30 seconds, I'm not going to give you the program, but health is a complex personal service. It's like lawyering, accounting, architecture, construction, airplane pilots, car repair. It's a complex personal service. All of those we leave to the free market. There is no reason that healthcare can't be left to the free market as well. And then a brutally competitive market can give us better service and lower prices. Oh my goodness, I haven't even gotten to horrible public education, labor laws, occupational licensing laws, immigration restrictions, regulatory barriers, lawsuits, prevailing wage, domestic content rules, the sand and the productivity gears. What are we going to do? Well, that's it. Those are all out there. But you can see the general principle can be used to fix all of those if we want to. You know, free markets is still a vital way to fix today's problems. And that's just today's economy. New ideas are also, the sand in the gears is there too. There's a possibility of factory-built mini nuclear power plants. Why don't we have those in the U.S.? Because the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has not licensed a single new plant since 1975. AI, we live in a moment of a spectacular technological advance. It's like Gutenberg. It's potentially like Gutenberg's movable press. And immediately, what do people want to do? Run to Washington to regulate it. And where's this? It's not just coming from fear the robots will take over. There's a strong demand to regulate it because this is information. We're living at the outbreak of the technical the censorship state. And boy, oh boy, who has control over ChatGPT-3 has control over politics, especially biology. I see great advances in biology. Better health, longevity, that what we're learning about the fundamentals of life is fantastic. But good luck getting FDA approval or increasingly politicized research funding. So let me summarize here. We can't just bemoan. There's a tendency among us free marketers to have a beer and to say, oh, how dumb. Why are there zoning laws are so dumb, they're stopping that. But if you understand where they came from and what the disincentives are, I think you have a better chance of fixing. You have to understand where they came from, that patchwork, the old lady and the fly, how to ask the right questions to get to the answer. You have to examine the whole system. You have to examine the incentives, and you have to make your opponent state the question. And then often there's a very simple answer. And then they go, duh, that wasn't the question I asked. It's okay. Now we'll have a better conversation. There's a way to do this. Economists are quite a bit at fault. My fellow economists, what you're taught in economics school is how to look at every problem, diagnose some failure of the hypothetical totally free market, and then advocate new rules that the benevolent, omniscient planner will do to fix the problem. But we don't live in a free market. When you see a problem, look first not at a hypothetical failure of some free market, look for the regulation that caused the problem. As you can see with zoning and housing, it's not a failure of the market, it's a regulatory failure. I have to close on an optimistic note. People often tell me, oh, if only we could get leaders who will listen. No, I believe in democracy. How does this happen? Things will get better when the average person understands how it works and votes for sensible policy. I know a lot of politicians. They, by and large, understand perfectly well how things work, and they understand they won't get voted in office for it. So when the average person sees, too high house prices and says, well, why don't we let people build more houses? You'll get politicians who understand that. So really, the way things work is there's leaders, there's the chattering classes around them, and there's the vast amount of sensible voters around that. If you operate in the world of ideas, then the politics will follow. And that's why institutions like this one exist. We exist to help the ideas that then will make their way into policy. The idea that you can just whisper into the great emperor's ear, that's not how a democracy works. And thank goodness that's the way our society works. Okay, thank you.
John, thank you. And now it's time for our Q&A session with our friend and colleague leading proceedings. Gene Tunny is Director of Adapt Economics in Brisbane, and he's the author of a recent CIS publication that I'd encourage you to read, Debunking Degrowth. Gene Tunny. Over to you, Gene.
Thanks, Tom, and thank you, John, for that excellent lecture. That was terrific. John, I'd like to start with this idea of the age of stagnation or the risk of stagnation, and it seems like you're attributing that to government, and I'd like to understand to what evidence there is behind that. So if you believe the people on the left, we've had an age of neoliberalism. We had the reforms of Thatcher and Reagan, and in this country we had Hawke and Keating and then Howard. And there's an argument that we've deregulated too much, but you would push back on that. Could you tell us a bit more about why you're so confident it's government regulation that is driving that slowdown?
You got an alternative for me? I mean, just look out the window and, try to run a business and see how hard it is to get anything done. So Reagan and Thatcher were great, but they just scratched the surface. They sort of talked about deregulation, but, how many federal agencies did Reagan actually get rid of? So there was a little bit of a pause, but the regulatory state just kept adding more and more. And I see it's a larger issue, not just of the size of regulation, but the nature of it. Our public institutions in the U.S. are fraying. I actually am a free marketer. I look back with nostalgia at the era of regulation, and by which I mean when our regulatory agencies had rules and cost-benefit analysis and public comment and proper procedures. Now it's just an executive order and a dear colleague letter, and so that's in many ways worse. As an example, also, it's getting more and more politicized. So you guys may not know what's going on. There was a case, Missouri v. Biden, that revealed what was happening, the censorship of the internet during the COVID era. And went unremarked. The Biden administration was simply threatening businesses like Twitter. We'll close you down. We'll send the EEOC, the NLRB, the EPA, this alphabet soup of agents. We'll send them after you. By saying that, you see right there, it's taken for granted. This isn't rules. This isn't law. This is just arbitrary power to close things down. So I see the regulatory state getting bigger, The legal system in the U.S., you can't get anything built because you're going to get years of environmental suits. And it's part of sort of the scorched earth politics. That may not be the answer to the question you wanted, but that's what I see.
No, that's okay. I just wanted to ask because the alternative view is that there has been that slowdown in the rate of innovation that you mentioned, the Robert Gordon thesis of the rise and fall of American growth. I think to me, it seems like a difficult thing to be able to prove one way or another.
It is. Now, what you're asking me is not just my view, but what I think of those views.
Yes.
Yeah, so these views, we got to take this seriously. Gordon basically said our growth was an S-shaped thing. It was a one-time thing. We learned to use fossil fuels, and that's over. The possibilities are over. And there is evidence, it's taking more and more resource to find an invention. But in part, that's always been the case. So there's a great study I saw of the steam engine. Steam engines invented. It wasn't, you've been to the museums. It wasn't like the final steam engine. 100 years of making it better and better, and it gets harder and harder to make it better, and we're kind of running out of ways to make steam engines better, and then someone invents the diesel engine, and then someone invents the airplane. So I think we've been in a period of sort of, there was a new invention, we kind of work at all that, and you're waiting for the next new thing to come, which I think is potentially biology or AI, so just wait. But who knows? That's a possibility. But we also know the regulatory state is causing tremendous problems. So, maybe we can only raise GDP by a factor of 4 before we run out of ideas. Factor of 4 would be pretty good. And to let India and Africa have our way, know how to do things the way, that would be pretty good too. And if 200 years from now, that's where we plateau, okay, we're done.
And what do you think the risks are with AI? I mean, there's a lot of potential there with biotech. Is the risk that we're going to be too timid, that we're going to over-regulate because of the precautionary principle, for example? How do you see that? And what alternative would you offer? Would you have a principle that you could apply for there?
Well, it's kind of the last big thing on the internet was social media sorts of things and Google. And then they've been kind of looking for I live in Silicon Valley. They've been looking for what to do for 10 years. And everybody wanted crypto for a while. That was kind of going nowhere. Now they kind of found it. But the old tech companies have turned into regulated utilities with remarkable speed. And I worry that this is really a demand for the new stuff to do that. The idea the robots will take over, they've been worrying about that since 1850. I think just technically that's silly. It completes your sentences. Don't worry about that taking over. I think the demand for regulation is a demand to control the flow of information that we get. And where I worry about tech is there's no monopoly that doesn't get enforced by the government that lasts very long. People say tech's a monopoly. Oh, yeah, Netscape, AOL, Yahoo, they got that one wrapped up, don't they? And the same thing is happening to the big tech companies now. So the demand, I think, really is the danger of the surveillance state, and so you can see the political demand for regulation, and people like to keep their profits up. So that's the demand for regulation, not that the robots are going to come get us.
Okay, I'd like to ask one again about government, and you mentioned the Marie Kondo approach to fixing government. And if I remember Marie Kondo correctly, it's you pick up an item, and if it doesn't bring you joy, you toss it out. Are there parts of the government that don't bring you joy that you would toss out?
I think the converse of that question is going to be easier to answer.
Right. Yes.
What do I like about the government? I think the U.S. is vastly underfunded its legal system. That it takes years to get something through the courts is just a shame. That's part of public infrastructure, where roads, bridges, and efficient courts. So that's as much as I hate lawyers and environmental suits and all the rest of it. Nonetheless, that's that's a part of the works that we could have some public infrastructure there. Is there anything else that we actually like? What do we like in the government?
That's okay.
Sorry. Yeah, national defense. That's a big inefficiency that we put up with. Thank you. Actually, it is remarkable. I'm a good libertarian and free marketer. That the military is so efficient at what it does. I mean, it's a big inefficient waste, but that it actually wins wars is pretty amazing. Given the structure, they're really amazing people.
Okay, John, I'd like to ask about healthcare, for example, and you're a proponent of free market in healthcare, a lot of the other advanced economies, or most of them, would have large public healthcare systems. And the concern is that if you have the free market in healthcare, there'd be some people that would miss out, they'd be left behind, there'd be people who couldn't afford it, people who wouldn't be insured. How do you deal with that objection, given if you look at the US system, US life expectancy is significantly lower than other advanced economies? How would you cope with that objection? I know it's difficult to unscramble from where we are, and you do have regulation intervention already, but how would you deal with that objection?
Yeah, U.S. already has a public health system. It's just a remarkably inefficient one. So most of the population is on some sort of government thing, whether it's Obamacare, federal employees, and the U.S. In other countries they say we're paying taxes. You're going to pay some taxes to pay for his health care. In the U.S., the government says, well, we don't want to tax and spend. Instead, you business are going to provide her health care. And is that any different than taxing and spending? But then we have this horrible system of cross subsidies, which is what kills the competition. So government doesn't want to pay that much. So we say, well, you hospital, you have to provide free health care. And that's fine. Where are we making up the difference? Well, we'll let you overcharge everybody else. Okay, but now you can't have any competition. And that's where the whole mess comes from. Now the left behind issue. So U.S. life expectancy is lower. That's because we shoot each other and we do a lot of bad drugs. But U.S. life expectancy, if you have cancer, is a whole lot better than anywhere else in the world. So it's horrendously expensive, but not that bad. Poor people have cars and houses and lots of things. They don't get great health care, by the way, anywhere in the world. Everywhere in the world, rich people have ways of getting really good quality health care, and we sort of have a fig leaf that everybody else is getting great stuff. So I don't see that free market health care, because it's going to be so much more competitive, so much more cost effective, I think it's going to serve poor people. Poor people, have money just like anybody else. They'll buy health insurance, and it'll be cost effective, and I don't mind subsidizing it. So you want to we can have transfers. I said you can have all the transfers you want. I'm going to give you a voucher. You can have a voucher for $5,000, $10,000. I don't care what it is. Go buy your health care on a brutally competitive insurance and healthcare market. You're going to come great because you got a $10,000 voucher.
Okay. Might be good to go to the audience soon, but I've got one more question.
I'll try to shorten up my answers soon, but stop asking such good questions.
No, I've got one more question about your fiscal theory of the price level, which John's written this immense book. It's fascinating. I've picked it up, but then I discovered I had to buy 3 more books to be able to interpret it. But it's terrific.
Get past just ignore the chapters with equations and get to the fun
That's
stuff.
very good. I'm getting through it. But John, how do you distinguish this from, say, the Milton Friedman view that inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon? You've got a fiscal theory of the price level. We look at what happened during the pandemic when we had this massive monetary expansion in the Western world and in Australia, in the United States, UK, and then we see the inflation following that and we think, well, this is what Milton Friedman was telling us. But you've got a theory of inflation that is different. You're saying it's to do with fiscal policy, with government debt.
Okay.
So what do you say about Friedman's theory, and how is yours different? How does yours add to it or reject Friedman?
Well, that's not a question that's going to get you a short answer. 600-page book in 30 seconds. Here we come. The fiscal theory of the price level says that where does inflation come from fundamentally? It comes from more government debt than people think can be repaid by future taxes. Government debt's an asset just like stocks and bonds. If you think the stock doesn't have any dividends coming, what do? You try to sell the stock, price goes down. If you hold government debt and you think, these guys are never going to pay this off, what do? You try to get rid of the government debt. How do you do that? You try to buy stuff. You try to sell the government debt, but we can't all sell it. What is it? If we try to sell the government debt, we buy stuff, prices go up. That's where inflation comes from. Now, what about Milton Friedman? I love Milton Friedman. Milton Friedman was 99% right. Wrong about one little thing. So Friedman, he said money causes inflation, not total government debt. Now, how do we agree and disagree? Suppose you take $5 trillion of money and hand it out from helicopters, as Milton said. That's going to cause inflation. I agree. Because money is one form of government debt. And when you drop money from helicopters, you're telling people, here's debt. We have no intention of paying this off with future taxes. So we agree. That's an expansion of government debt. That's money that finances a deficit. But suppose the government drops $5 trillion of money from helicopters, and simultaneously the government burglars come and take $5 trillion of treasury bills out of your safe. You have no more wealth. You have lots more money, but we took away your treasury bills. Now, monetarism would say that causes exactly the same inflation as just giving you the debt. And I say, What counts is overall amount of government liabilities. And as proof, yes, in the pandemic, the government did drop a lot of money and debt on everyone and got inflation. It was financing huge deficits. That was a fiscal expansion. The government also did $5 trillion of giving you money and taking back debt. That was called quantitative easing. And what did that do? Pfft, nothing. So $5 trillion in quantitative easing designed to increase inflation, absolutely no effect whatsoever. $5 trillion of deficits, which could have been money, could have been debt, $5 trillion of deficits, we got inflation. That's actually episode 1 for the fiscal theory.
Okay. Thanks, Joe. That explains it better to me for sure.
And Milton was great.
Yeah.
Milton had many episodes of money causing inflation, and they were almost all governments printing money to cover deficits. So we agree on all those episodes.
Very good. Okay, Tom, should we open up to the floor for questions? And I'm going to enforce the questions must be questions rule. Gigi Foster.
I welcome speeches, short speeches.
Gigi Foster. I'm a professor of economics at UNSW, one of our local universities, and thank you so much for your lovely talk, which I will be trying to get somehow for my students. Hopefully CIS will make that possible. So I really agree with 99% of what you said, but towards the end, I thought maybe your optimism about being able to fix this through democratic processes may be a little bit overstated. And my worry is that what we have now is this sclerotic mess in not just in government, but in organizations as well, including universities, and it is sustained by poor incentives on the part of the people in the state and the bureaucracies that are not accountable, and the politicians themselves who are career incentives. And what we face is a situation similar to what Kafka saw, similar to what we had in the USSR before it fell. And we know that how those bureaucracies end is they either have wars that defeat them, or they come crashing down under the weight of their own inefficiency. And right now, our democratic mechanisms are not very strong. A few elections sometimes, to me, is just not a strong enough force. So I've been advocating for a lot of direct democratic revival in the resistance and restoration movement here in Australia, and I wanted to know what you thought about the need for that. And if we don't think it's necessary, how is this going to come to pass?
In the past, democracies, especially actually small countries who seem better able to do it than the U.S., are capable of reform. Even in the U.S., we've had a Social Security reform, we had a tax reform. There is, historically, we've been able to fix things. I worry, as you do, that the institutions are fraying. That we are in the U.S. Having the government is so powerful that it's worth scorched earth tactics to destroy the institutions to grab power for the next round, because then you get control of the Justice Department, the surveillance state, the taxes, and all the rest of it. A limited government allows you to lose elections and go lick your wounds and try again. So, and I'll be a little political here. I think one of our biggest challenges is we face a political religious movement on the far progressive left that has understood the march through the institutions. It's a small fraction of popular opinion, but they know they grab the educational institutions, they grab the bureaucracies, they grab the philanthropies, they grab the universities. They have the institutions of civil society in their grasp, and they are profoundly undemocratic. They call themselves Save Our Democracy, but they are Maoist in their policies, and with the fraying of institutions and the rise of a technical surveillance state, that is a genuine threat to democracy and growth. So I was trying to close optimistically. I'm making your point. I am, very worried about that and our freedom to have events like this.
Righto. Peter Tulip at the back, and then over here. Yep. Peter Tulip, thank you.
Yeah.
Chief Economist at CIS, yes.
Thank you. I'd like to ask about you're talking about avoiding the old left-right division, that a lot of the regulations you want to get rid of have a strong constituency within the economics profession. But that's not true of all of them. There are some views, and in particular free trade or housing policy you mentioned, where left-wing economists like Jason Furman or Paul Krugman have almost exactly the same agenda as you do. But the general public is on a different planet. And part of that is that the public just doesn't trust market forces. I was wondering if you have views, how do we prosecute those other issues where economists across the spectrum agree and we're against the general public?
Boy, that's a hard one. By the way, the econ profession is in many cases very interested also. How do you get like health economists? They live to consult for the big health. They're not going to say free market. They live to provide advice to the benevolent dictators. They tend to be pro-regulation as well. How do we get basic education on basic things? I don't know. Support the Institute. I'm going to think about that one and come back after another question, but because those are fairly straightforward. Now, of course, the far left doesn't believe them, and the far right doesn't either. Trump is 25% tariffs on everybody. In fact, I was so disappointed in California. There's now a YIMBY movement where progressive lefties are saying, you know what? I get it. The only way to bring down housing prices is let people build housing and market rate housing, not just government subsidized housing. And instantly, the Republican Party said, no, we must have zoning control and local. So don't count on the right to be free market either.
Over here, and then we'll go over here. Yes, if you could just say...
Yes, Michael Potter. So I just wanted to ask about, you mentioned, I think, when you were talking about healthcare, that the US system is actually worse than a socialised system. I was just wondering if you could expand or develop on that idea. Why is a system which is sort of partly free market and partly regulated or socialised, why is that actually worse than a fully socialised system?
Well, in part I was making a joke. There's a couple of original sins in U.S. healthcare, and one of them is this idea that we're not going to tax and spend, we're going to do it by forced cross subsidies. Because if you tax and spend, you can still have a competitive system. When you do it by forced cross subsidies, you have to stop competition, and then just the prices explode. So, we have better healthcare than most places, but we have twice as good healthcare at 5 times the price. And actually, there is this issue. What do you do about poor people? And I said vouchers, one way to do it. Another way is let's just... if you want to, deal with homeless people shouldn't die in the gutter, why don't we pass some taxes and give them whatever health care you think is a compassionate society deserves, the least fortunate, and then the rest of us can be left to the mercies of the free market. And one of the crazy things is that my health care and insurance has to be so screwed up just because to provide health care to the bottom 5% of the homeless person in the gutter. That's silly. We need, I can still go to a private hotel, and we don't try to socialize that in order to solve the homeless problem. So there is, a government-provided system, all one in, is pretty horrendously inefficient. But a system, a crony capitalist system, can be as inefficient as a well-run government-provided system, and I'll say it, I would be for taxing and spending. One way to, tax and provide a community hospital for the poor, and then we get the free market.
Okay. We've got some questions over here, and then we'll go to you. We'll go to this gentleman. Thank you, and then to you next. Yeah.
Hello, my name's David Tregenza. I was just wondering, when you talked about development economics, I've read arguments from maybe more progressive that the reason America is such, all those ideas booming is from their large spend on military, which then leaks to entrepreneurs, and that's where computers, internet, rockets, satellites, and all that come from. What do you say to that?
Well, China seems pretty good at taking our military ideas and implementing them. Those ideas are available for anyone. Now, to what extent was, to what extent the ideas, is that the most efficient way to produce new ideas? Apollo program was 1% of GDP. We got Tang and Teflon, maybe we could have gotten that cheaper from other ways. So some of the basic ideas did come from the military, but the hard work is not the basic idea. The hard work is implementing it and starting the new company. Famously, Xerox created the mouse and didn't know what to do with it. Steve Jobs saw the mouse and boom, he knew what to do with it. So I'm not sure that we have a dearth of basic ideas. What we have is the ability to take new ideas and implement them in new companies, which then challenge the profits and ways of doing things of the old companies.
Okay, and at the front, we've got a question here.
Jay Horton.
Oh, I should say, basic research is a government function. So, it's going to be inefficient, but I guess, what did we say? A well-run basic research is a useful government function. Unfortunately, of institutions that are fraying, the Department of Energy now, all research funding in the U.S. is number one. We want to see your plan for diversity, inclusion, and equity before you even turn in what you want to do. And if that doesn't, we're not going to even read the actual research proposal. So there's this idea we could subsidize research, but it's easy to have that fall apart. Okay, sorry, question.
Jay Horton, as you were speaking, I had this vision of Margaret Thatcher's love's child conceived with Milton Friedman. It was you. So can you explain how we, or the new Margaret Thatcher, lights the bonfire of regulations? Do we need a new kind of political leadership that will take us into this this new era?
Yes. I'll go back to, there's plenty of political leaders who get this and who have what I do not have. I'm not the ability. A politician is a noble calling because it is very difficult to bring people in a room and talk to them and get things moving. I'm terrible at that. You have to have patience and listen to people and keep your focus on it. There's plenty, I got to know Paul Ryan as an example. He understands how things work, but, he's not in office. So I do really think we need people to understand the ideas, and then they'll elect politicians who know how to do it. And then it's patient work. Phil Gramm made a great remark. He said the problem with America is Democrats love government, so they're really good at it. And they go into office and they know how to appoint who to the head of which agency and get people really stuffed in there. Republicans hate government, so they go in and they say, I hate all these agencies. And they might appoint a head or two of the agencies. The staff knows how to get rid of that guy. I forget which one it was. Trump put in, I forget which agency it was, put in someone at the head, and the lawyer sabotaged him by letting him take a private jet ride. And then it came out that he took a private jet ride. He's out. His own counsel didn't tell him that this was going to violate some ethics. They know how to do that stuff. Republicans don't know how to do that stuff. So you need people who understand the system to go in and clean up the rot. It's, the Marie Kondo job is not an easy one, but I hope, we produce young people who will go to Washington and here too, and Canberra, and wherever your agencies are, and undertake that hard work of cleaning the sock drawer.
Okay, we've got one question over here and then one over here, so we'll go to the back first, if we can.
Yeah, hi, I trained and work as an economist, so no broad disagreement with you. But if I read you and I read Adam Smith, I think one of the areas he might disagree with you is that free markets are the product of civil society. He would say that free markets are the result of functioning civil society, where I think you might think that civil society is the function of free markets, and that not a revival of our civil institutions, which are related to our political institutions. Just insisting on free markets is a bit like getting a horse before the cart.
Oh boy, that's a deep political question. I hope we might agree. I mean, there's sort of a general Enlightenment principle which is falling apart, that, property rights. Property rights are a wonderful thing. We all understand how property rights work, and that was deeply embedded in sort of the social and political consciousness. And now people don't believe it. I mean, as an example of public education, how you need average people to feel about things. it was proposed that a school near where I am wanted to expand, and instantly people say, stop it, traffic. Our reaction was, of course, is they own the land, they can do whatever the hell they want with it. And that used to be the Western tradition. So I'm sorry, I think of civil society, free speech, freedom to contract, free rights. Those are all part and parcel of economic freedom, and vice versa. Milton Friedman said this: you can't have economic freedom without political freedom. If you can't be economically free if you're censored in what you speech. One of the things I really worry about, the freedom to transact anonymously. You used to be able to, I buy, you sell, and that's that. And now that's all reportable to the federal government, and digital currency can mean they watch every transaction we make. How can you have political freedom if you're not able to buy and sell? So I'm kind of fumbling on you. I think these are all part and parcel of the same thing, but you can educate me later on which is more important than the others.
So Nicholas Moore, is it? Has the microphone?
Yeah, Nicholas. Hi, thanks for the presentation. It's been terrific. I'm, of course, a subscriber to as you say, 99% of these views. Using a natural experiment, US versus the UK, I think is a good test. But I always used to get confused when I looked at France and the UK, because for the French obviously wouldn't embrace the sort of ideas we're talking about, whereas the UK typically would have. And again, looking at the US, the contrast between California, who arguably embrace all the wrong ideas, and when we talk about AI, where's that coming from? So there does, the natural experiments throw up a bit of challenge, don't they, in terms of where GDP per capita ends up, where ideas come from?
I don't know. France and the UK, that difference in terms of overall level of so.
Same. That's a point. The GDP's per capita is the same.
And France spends 50.
So more open and one's more closed.
Well, I don't know. France spends 55% of GDP. The UK spends 50% of GDP on government stuff. There's sort of this deindustrialized. The UK is a financial center and then tourist deindustrialized wasteland. France has a certain efficient technocracy. So they may be socialist, but they kind of they send people to the École Polytechnique, and then they build nuclear power plants, and we don't kind of let you. I don't know what it's like in the U.S. There's kind of anything we want to build in the U.S. There's just this chaos of regulatory nightmare. And can you get stuff built in the UK the way you can? You get the technocrats in France to build something. They build something. They can build a high-speed train. The U.S. can't build a high-speed train. I don't know if I told this story. SNCF bailed out of the contract to build the California high-speed train. He says, you guys are crazy. Not even socialist France works like this. So I don't know. I don't see a great. I wish the UK had taken Brexit and become Singapore on Thames, but they don't seem headed in that direction.
No. Was there a question over here? There's one over here. Thanks.
If I could ask, in the context of one of your pod buddies, Neil Ferguson, he's spoken of the 6 killer apps of prosperity. And is not the question, you describe perfectly, and I'm sure you're pushing on an open door here about regulation and taxes and incentives, but he spoke of the 6 killer apps of prosperity. Is not the issue more fundamental that we're actually deleting some of the more important ones? Property rights, competition, work ethic, for example.
And work ethic, I think, is a result of bad incentives. You face 100% marginal tax rate for a couple of generations, you learn not to work. I'll just say yes.
Very good. Michael Brennan, is it Michael? Yep.
Thanks. Michael Brennan. Used to be the chair of the Productivity Commission in Australia up until a couple of weeks ago. I wanted to ask about the economics profession and where you see the role that it has played. I mean, I hate to indulge in nostalgia, but it does feel as though in your country and ours, the economics profession had played a much stronger role in the economic policy debate, but had a much stronger feel for markets, institutions, the broad sweep. It feels to me as though a lot of economists have gone down different rabbit holes, either very abstract or ultra empirical, but involved in very narrow questions rather than the sorts of big questions that you're posing and answering.
To the extent that economists want to waste their time on technical stuff, they're not harming anybody, so enjoy it. The economics profession has actually always been quite left-wing and statist, and serve and view their job as sort of advancing progressive goals. The American Economic Association was founded that way. There was kind of you're thinking Milton Friedman, University of Chicago, but that was a very small number of people for a very short window of time. And now mostly they're in there advancing progressive agendas. You can't even, you can't publish a paper that says raising minimum wages lowers employment anymore. So it's kind of going the way of the other science as well. So we're really, the danger I see is that it is becoming part of the ideology production machine for the progressive narrative and becoming less open to critical empirical work that challenges that narrative. And when you work for the government, guess what? You tend to say that the government's good things.
Okay. There's one question over here.
Yeah, David Murray. How do you help people understand these concepts of corporate social responsibility and social license?
Do I want them to understand those concepts? I'm with Friedman. Your job is to make profits for your shareholders. Unfortunately, right now, the way you make profits for your shareholders is to keep the regulators out of your hair, and the way you do that is to echo whatever political blather is in the regulators' minds these days. So never count on big businesses to challenge the regulatory state or argue for free markets. They're in business to get good regulatory treatment, and maybe you can protect us from your markets, and that means they go along with whatever nonsense is coming out of Washington.
Okay. John, I might ask one more question. I've had a gentleman on my podcast who produces these things called goldbacks. So there are a lot of people, maybe it's still I don't know, it's under 10% of the population, but there are a significant number of people who are worried about the future of the US and the future of the global economy and, worry about fiat money. Is fiat money a problem? Do we need to go back to something like a gold standard or gold-backed currency? What's your view on that before we wrap up?
Fiat money is now a share in the federal government. It is not, fiat money means money that's backed by nothing, but our money is backed. Our money is backed by the willingness of our government to raise taxes to soak up the money if necessary. I'm giving you fiscal theory of the price level. So it's a great system so long as our governments maintain the fiscal space to always back their money with taxpayer. And it's a good system so long as governments are fiscally solvent. I think the danger of the current, not fiat money, so the current system of money backed by the present value of fiscal surpluses is that it might not be backed anymore. And that therefore I do see a possibility of a grand sovereign debt crisis. When do you get a crisis? Nobody ever sees a crisis coming, right? Because if you knew the crisis was going to happen tomorrow, then it would have already happened today. You'd run and get your money out. What is the one, and crises always happen when there's money that can't be paid back, shady accounting, and nobody doubts that this is good stuff yet. Have I just described government debt? So I think, in the next crisis, there is a possibility that we reveal our governments to have debts that they have no way of repaying, and you could have a global inflation, a default on, Italy and some of the EU states. Basically, a run on sovereign debt is possible. We're not there yet, but that's kind of where the end of Western civilization goes. And then you got a problem because our monetary system is all built on the idea that government debt is sacrosanct. Now, really, any idea of history, and you think government debt is the safest assets? Since Henry III, I think, defaulted on the Peruzzi, government debt has been the riskiest asset around, and so we live in this kind of golden age. So, to your question, I think if that happens, we're in smoking financial ruins, but you might want some monetary system that doesn't depend on the value of the government. And we all have our free market fantasies about it. That's the one place I've kind of stuck with the government. We have a decent system of short-term government debt as long, it works okay in free market fantasy land. After we've had our third drink, We should talk about private monetary systems. For the moment, I kind of put it in, airline pilots. Yeah, pilot licenses should be privatized. Okay. Maybe that's not the first thing we want to do. It's kind of the thing you talk about at the third rank of the Cato. So the same thing. Now, gold is not the answer. So a gold standard is a government promise to deliver gold. So you haven't gotten rid of the government. And a gold standard is a fiscal commitment. No government's ever had enough gold to back their currency. So what is a gold standard? A gold standard is the government says, I promise all these notes, I'll one for one with gold, and I don't have the gold. So what keeps that afloat? What keeps that afloat is the government's commitment that if you start coming to ask for gold, I will raise taxes enough to get or borrow the gold to give you. It's a commitment to running the fiscal theory at the price level. And it's a bad one because the relative price of gold and other stuff fluctuates. It just would not work in a modern economy because we don't use gold coins. So gold isn't the answer. And gold doesn't obviate the problem of if the governments are bankrupt, they're not going to be able to give you a gold standard. Is there something in the Bitcoin space that could maybe do it? We need to, I believe money has to be backed. So you need to find a security that's backed by real assets, that has a steady real value, that there's a lot of it, and that people could use. We could devise such a system, but why don't we just have our governments not default and have to build this from the smoking ruins anyway?
Very good. Professor John Cochrane, terrific. Thank you. John's going to move the voter, thanks. Very good. Terrific.
For decades, CIS has been a fiercely independent voice working hard to promote sound liberal principles. To be notified of our future videos, make sure you subscribe to our channel, then click the notification bell. We rely solely on the generosity of people like you for donations to advance our classical liberal cause. Check out the links on screen now to see how you can get involved.